Greetings, my friends! This is a video I have been thinking to make for some time, and it is a ranking of 15 different martial arts, in my opinion the most interesting or well-known ones, from the best to the worst in terms of effectiveness in one-to-one combat. Make sure to stick around until the end of the video, because I have a bonus surprise ranking for you at the end that you might find very interesting. So, to begin with, this ranking is about one-to-one combat, without weapons or without using things from your environment, just pure, simple, unarmed conflict. And it has to do with who neutralizes his opponent. The normal ranking is A, B, C, D. S is just a very special ranking, so it will only be given to the very best martial arts, in my opinion. So, to begin with, Aikido. Aikido is something I've done for several years, I think 4 years approximately. So I do have personal knowledge of it, and even though there are martial arts like Aikido, which I find very useful for certain things, and I can recognize their benefits in certain areas, this video is about pure combat effectiveness in a conflict with somebody else who is probably trained. So I have to give Aikido the last rank in that. It's just not very effective in a conflict. It relies heavily on cooperation of your opponent, and the fact that it lacks real competition where people are really trying to beat you makes it something very stylized, very traditional, but not very effective in realistic terms. The second martial art that I have here is karate. Karate I will give one more rank than Aikido, so it goes to the C rank, which means it's more effective than Aikido, but not particularly effective in a conflict in the street, let's say, or in a self-defense situation. The reason for that is that most karate styles are also very stylized and very traditional, and even though some of them do have competitions, and two of the most popular ones that come to mind are Shotokan Karate and Kyokushinkai Karate. And by the way, I do have personal experience in doing karate, especially since I was also doing ninjutsu, which basically has all the striking of karate as it's striking. Shotokan Karate's problem is that it's soft contact, so it's basically you need to touch your opponent and you get a point. And then Kyokushinkai Karate is definitely not soft contact, it's a full contact karate with very hard strikes. But it's got a special rule, which is that you're not allowed to punch to the face of your opponent. So even though Kyokushinkai guys, they build very resilient bodies, they can take like any strike almost to the body or the legs, they only learn to defend the head against head kicks, which, they don't learn to defend against punches, and they don't learn to move in and out because they don't need it for the competitions. So when you see a Kyokushinkai guy in a mixed martial arts fight, it's always, unless he has also practiced other things, it's always very bad mobility combined with almost no ability to defend punches to the face, which is a very bad combination for any fight. So for these reasons, karate goes to tier C. Next, we have boxing. Boxing is better than karate, so it goes to tier B. The reason is that boxing does have the pressure testing due to competitions which are completely full contact. People are trying to literally knock each other out. So you are able to test your ability against somebody who doesn't want to cooperate. That alone, combined of course with the training, which is similar. So you are punching a punching bag, when in karate you're usually just punching the air. So even that alone, combined with the fact that you learn how to block more properly, you have head movement, which you don't have too much head movement in karate. It's mostly mobility with the legs that they're using there to avoid strikes. And the blocks are also extended blocks usually, and they don't learn how to also block from a very close distance, and those are major vulnerabilities in karate, which you don't have in boxing. In boxing you train head movement, you train also blocking from a close distance, but it is not higher than B, because it is very one-sided and lacking martial art for self-defense. And one of the reasons is boxers typically do not have any endurance in their legs. So a few leg kicks and they're down. Their legs are just simply not conditioned to take kicks. And also boxing works as a style only against somebody who also will only box. So for example, when somebody ducks under a punch, he doesn't expect a knee. So he can duck as low as he wants, even all the way down to very low. And that's fine in boxing. Nothing bad is going to happen to him because of it. But in a real fight, he will just get a knee in the face. And also, of course, boxers are notoriously bad at grappling because there is literally no grappling in boxing. So because of those vulnerabilities, they go to B, to tier B. The next one is something that most of you probably don't know about. It is called Kampfringen, and it's basically what you would call European martial arts. So we're doing HEMA, which is Historical European Martial Arts. That's my sport that I'm doing now, and which Apocalyptic Nights is a school for. And let's say this is the unarmed part of it, even though it also has some self-defense with some types of knife called Messer. And it originates from Germany, from medieval Germany. And there they had Ringen, which means wrestling, more or less. And that was like the sports version of wrestling. But Kampfringen is, they put the Kampf in front of Ringen to distinguish between the sport wrestling and the martial art. So the self-defense version of wrestling, of Ringen, is Kampfringen. And this is something that we supposedly do in HEMA, even though, to be honest, most schools do not practice it. They just stick to the swords. And I will put Kampfringen right at C, because even though it is a martial art that has a lot of images and it is kind of rich in images and descriptions of techniques, the techniques are very outdated, and a lot of them suffer from the same problem like a lot of other martial arts, which is that they are designed to work when somebody very strong does them to somebody very weak, or somebody experienced does them to somebody inexperienced. For a martial art to be good and effective, in my book, it has to work when two people of the same level can apply them to each other successfully, the techniques I mean, or even somebody of a lower strength, let's say, applies them to somebody who is stronger successfully. That is a good criterion of which martial art is effective or not. So Kampfringen doesn't go to D because even though it suffers from the superficiality of some of its techniques, it still has a good variety, and it also has that attitude of doing whatever works in theory. So for that alone, I think it is because it's not so stylized, it goes one rank above Aikido, but it's still not as effective. It is, I have to say that, it is up to us in HEMA to actually revise Kampfringen at some point. Some people really have to get to work on it, revise it, and make it come up to date with the modern understanding of techniques. There is no reason why we should limit ourselves to just the historical ones, even if it has a historical base. So many martial arts have done that, have rediscovered themselves and reshaped themselves in a way that they're functional and useful. There's no reason why we cannot do it with Kampfringen, so I hope for that for the future of HEMA. So the next martial art we're gonna see is kickboxing. Kickboxing is basically boxing, but it also has kicks, and I would easily put it in an A rank. It's a very effective martial art in one-to-one combat. And the reason for that is very simple. Unlike boxing, and even though it includes the technique of boxing, I would say it includes all the technique of boxing, but it also includes kicks, and depending on which organization you're talking about, it also includes knees. So it is a lot more rounded up and a lot more efficient because now you're getting closer to a real fight. It's also full contact like boxing, of course, but the addition of kicks completely changes the engagement range, and it also changes the parts of the body you can attack with and the parts of the body you can inflict damage to. So those big changes make it be a lot more efficient compared to boxing as a martial art. It doesn't go to the S rank, which is a special rank. I don't know what the S stands for. I guess special or super. But the reason why it doesn't go to the S rank is because kickboxers still don't know how to grapple. And so if somebody manages to take them down or just gets a hold of them and starts wrestling with them, they really are in deep trouble. They can try to do some of the things that they can do, but for the most part, they will be like little babies on the ground in a very short time after this happens. So the next martial art I want to talk about is Krav Maga. Krav Maga is a martial art that was created by Israeli martial artists. It is cited in some places that they were very influenced by ninjutsu. So they studied in ninjutsu, and basically I think they did a research and came up with a very practical version of martial arts, which is completely self-defense oriented. And the focus of Krav Maga is you can learn it quickly. You can learn just the meat and potatoes of martial arts, let's say, and you can be effective in a very short time in a self-defense situation. That approach alone is enough to put it one level higher than other martial arts, like even Kampfringen, which is supposed to be like medieval self-defense. So I will put it at B, but the reason why it doesn't go any higher as a martial art for one-to-one combat is because it still suffers, because I've also done Krav Maga and I've also seen different schools and different approaches. It is more practical and realistic than a lot of other martial arts, but it still suffers from stylization. And what I mean by that is that the trainings still do not have as much resistance as they should. And I mean, I'm not blaming them for it. It is difficult to have that much resistance when you train a martial art that is designed to be applied outside the ring, because some things would really, we haven't come up with safe ways to train some of the things very well, at least in realistic conditions, like in a fight. For example, if you start including groin strikes and headbutts to the face in martial arts training, then that will result in a lot of damage to the students. And I mean, they still have to live their lives after that. They still have to go to work or to their families or, be functional. So it's not so easy to train some of those things. But anyway, for that reason, because the intensity is still adjusted to the level of the practitioner, and because there is no competition, there is no Krav Maga competition, at least no fighting competition like in boxing or kickboxing. For that reason, I think it still suffers from some level of stylization, even though it's not as much as other martial arts. But for that reason, it goes to B. So the next martial art I want to talk about is Kung Fu. Kung Fu is an easy D because it's very inefficient. I won't say it's completely inefficient, but I will say it is very inefficient. And like I might have told you, I've been doing martial arts for decades. I've studied to some extent all the martial arts that I have encountered. And Kung Fu, the main problem of Kung Fu is that its techniques are very static. They rely on people being very close to each other. So it really lacks movement. There is not much movement in and out. And also the blocks and the defense against punches, as well as the punches, are very inefficient. It is not designed around knockout punches, but for that reason, the defense to those punches is adjusted accordingly, and it is also not an efficient defense against hard punches that are trying to knock you out. The only people I've seen have any amount of success using Kung Fu, because I've seen a lot of people getting beaten up by using Kung Fu in MMA competitions and whatnot. The only people that I've seen using Kung Fu and have some kind of success were some Shaolin, but they're training their Qi or their Qi, which is like their vital energy. It's an electromagnetic type of energy because, I don't know if you know it, but our body works with electricity that creates electromagnetic field. So that field can actually be focused on and projected so that it makes some parts of the body harder. Even strikes, it can make strikes be harder. And That's the secret of the whole Shaolin magic, it would seem. How they do superhuman things, which are not superhuman, they're just human. But they require a lot of training. So I've seen some Shaolin have some success against MMA fighters, for example, in the ring. But most of the success was because they could absorb crazy amounts of punishment without going out, which is impressive, but I still don't know if it's good for their brain health. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to judge a martial art as something good just because they can use their head to block punches with their face. Yeah, there is a definite lack of defensive as well as offensive capability, as well as movement, and that's why it goes to the D tier. By the way, Aikido is a similar thing. When I go to Judo, I think Judo is basically Aikido, but in a realistic sense. Aikido might work for some people who supposedly Ueshiba, its founder, had conquered that power, the power of using his ki or his chi, and that worked for him. But if you're not at that level, Aikido simply doesn't work. If you cannot magically use your hands and your electromagnetic energy to just throw people around, which I think most people cannot do. So for a normal person, it just doesn't work, similar with Kung Fu. The next martial art I want to talk about is MMA. And MMA goes all the way up to the top tier. It is, in my opinion, the most complete and the best martial art to train. Even though I have to say that doesn't mean it's 100% perfect as a martial art, because it still doesn't train certain things that you use in a self-defense situation, like headbutts, for example, or there are other techniques which are illegal in MMA, and which, of course, if it's a matter of, I mean, you're not going to use them if there is like a minor altercation, I guess, but if it's a matter of life and death, then all bets are off. So, yeah, MMA doesn't include that, but it is, as martial arts go, the most complete. It's got everything. It's got elite grappling, elite wrestling, elite striking, using the entire body except of course the head. So it is the most complete set of martial arts, and what makes it so good is that it has actually derived from a comparative study of all martial arts. The idea about creating MMA or mixed martial arts, which happened with the founding of the UFC way back in time, was that there were some martial artists, specifically doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they wanted to prove that their martial art is better compared to the other ones. So they challenged any martial artist to come fight them, to prove which martial art is better. So immediately that pitted all the martial arts against each other and showed which martial arts are effective, and also it highlighted the parts of that martial art that were effective. So the whole compendium of martial arts, which MMA includes now, and if you go to an MMA school you will be taught all that, resulted from a comparative study of all the martial arts. So it picked all the good parts of every martial art and applied only those, because only those had proven that they work. For that reason, it's, in my opinion, number one. The next martial art is ninjutsu. It's a martial art that I've done for many years. I've done about 7 years of ninjutsu. So after MMA, I think it's the second martial art that I've done the most. And it's also in my best years, health-wise, that I've done it. It's like in my peak, I was doing ninjutsu. And ninjutsu will go to tier C. So the reason for that is same thing as Krav Maga and Kampfringen, is that it's a whatever comes, I will deal with it kind of approach. And it's kind of an anything goes approach as well in self-defense. So that is an asset, but it suffers from extreme stylization. It also suffers from the same problem that I said before that Krav Maga suffers. And basically most martial arts suffer from that, which is the in vitro techniques, which are not tested against, because it's so hard to test them. Just because they're just so dangerous, it's hard to test some of them against a real opponent in realistic conditions. And also there is a lot of nonsense in ninjutsu, as well as most other martial arts. Even Krav Maga has some nonsense. Even though it's supposed to be a no-nonsense martial art, it does have some nonsense, which will never work in a million years in that way. in a certain situation, but ninjutsu has a lot of that. So for that reason, it goes to tier C. It is above Aikido and Kung Fu because it does have a practicality. It does have a level of practicality, I mean. It's striking, it's karate basically, and it's grappling. Let's say it takes many different martial arts. It takes striking from karate, and it's got some, jiu-jitsu-like grappling, and some judo-like grappling, but you can say it's a jack of all trades and master of none. And the stylization makes everything a bit iffy. So for that reason, it goes to tier C. The next martial art I want to talk about is Sambo. Sambo is a martial art that the Russians made. It's heavily influenced by judo and just by striking, I guess. Any kind of striking, boxing, kickboxing, whatever. And it's a very effective martial art which goes up with MMA to tier S. If I could give a small edge to MMA or Sambo, I would probably give that edge to MMA, but that would be a slight edge, and that's just because MMA fighters, I think, have more tools in their toolbox. But on the other hand, Sambo fighters have focused more heavily on some of the tools in their toolbox rather than others, so that they basically use more the tools that work a little better, so it kind of balances out. If that is too confusing what I just said, it's that, for example, Sambo fighters, they really don't like bottom position when they're wrestling. While an MMA fighter, if he does BJJ, he has no problem with even giving up bottom positions, so he can do triangles and whatnot from the bottom. But Sambo fighters really like to be on top, and they like to smash opponents, so it's very influenced by Olympic wrestling, I guess, and other things like that. And it works. I mean, you can see Dagestani fighters in MMA, they dominate. It's hard to deal with them. But sometimes they might get caught in a choke or in a triangle or whatever. But usually not. I would put them in the same category. And yeah, Sambo is pretty great. So the next martial art I want to talk about is Taekwondo. Taekwondo goes to a very easy C tier, because like karate, it's not complete. It's not a complete martial art at all. I would actually put it a bit beneath karate. It's not even as effective as karate. Karate is more effective than Taekwondo. Taekwondo is a soft contact sport. You don't need to knock anybody out. You just need to touch them, and their techniques reflect that very well. It focuses very heavily on foot mobility or leg mobility. But most Taekwondo kicks can easily be absorbed by anybody who is trained in fighting, I mean. And he will keep coming to you, and right after he absorbs that kick and he is in range, you're in trouble. So I would not think Taekwondo is effective as a martial art, not very much. It's not completely ineffective, but it's far from the most effective martial art. It goes to tier C. I've never seen a fighter in the UFC or anywhere who uses exclusively Taekwondo and is having any kind of success, to be honest. Simply because of how they train. It's not that somebody cannot get good afterwards, after he also learns Taekwondo. And of course, the agility of the kicks is something useful that can be applied by anybody to some effect, but just the way they train is not efficient for defending yourself against somebody else in a self-defense situation. And the next one I want to talk about is wrestling. Wrestling goes over Taekwondo and all that stuff to tier B, together with boxing and Krav Maga. The reason why it goes to tier B and not beneath is that wrestling is actually a very useful discipline, a very useful martial art. And by the way, because there are many types of wrestling, I'm specifically talking about Olympic wrestling or Greco-Roman wrestling, as it's called. The reason why it goes to above other martial arts is because wrestling is simply very, very effective. Wrestlers tend to dominate sports like MMA because it's just very hard to deal with somebody once he gets hold of you and knows how to manipulate your body. And as a martial art, it does have a lot of function to an extent, because you can, even if you don't know how to strike or anything else, you can still just throw somebody around, ragdoll him, and if it's like there's concrete, there are things like that outside the ring, which can cause a lot of damage to somebody if you use wrestling against him. But exactly that limitation, which it doesn't contain strikes, and it doesn't also it is also quite limited in what they can do, what they're allowed to do, and what they need to do to win. So it doesn't also have almost any locks or any chokes, stuff like that you use to submit somebody. For that reason, it also has big gaps that can be exploited in its functionality. And that's why it goes to tier B and not above that. The next one I want to talk about is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I remind you here that we're talking about 1 versus 1 combat. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu goes all the way up to A tier. It is an A tier martial art. So if somebody is very good at BJJ and you get in a fight with them, you can expect to be in trouble. Because all they need to do is get a hold of you, and especially if it goes to the ground, which they should be able to do. And I mean, they don't even need to perform a takedown, which they're not particularly good at usually. They can just pull guard, so they can just give up bottom position. And if that happens, it will be basically, there will be a huge problem for the attacker. The reason why it doesn't go any higher than A to MMA or Sambo levels is because it doesn't have any striking, and somebody can actually, with good footwork and even takedown defense, can keep his distance and keep striking. And the BJJ guy can literally do almost nothing about that if that happens. And also because, for the reason that I said, because it doesn't involve striking, there are some possibilities for even a person that is tied up in ground combat with a BJJ practitioner. There are some possibilities for him to exploit the gaps between grappling to strike. And if the BJJ practitioner especially is not trained to take a punch or to defend against it, then he may be actually defeated. For that reason, it goes to A. The other martial art that I'd like to talk about is Judo. Judo goes to tier B. It's a very effective martial art. It's got its limitations. It doesn't have any striking, and it also is a grappling-oriented martial art, which is done only wearing a gi or a suit, like a martial arts suit, a uniform. So it can be applied very well in certain situations, like, for example, when it's winter and we're wearing coats. We have a coat or we're wearing some substantial clothes. But if it's summer, for example, and you're wearing a t-shirt, Judo loses a lot of its functionality. There are still some techniques, some throws and whatnot that you can apply, but it loses a lot of them because a lot of them rely on being able to grab the uniform of the other fighter and throw them to the ground thus. So if you grab a t-shirt in the same way, the t-shirt will just, it's very immaterial, it will just be torn apart, and the throw is not going to be as effective or even happen at all, actually, probably. It's not going to happen. So for that reason, it goes to B and not higher, but it's still, I would say it's the form of Aikido. And I have to say that both Judo and Aikido, they derive from the corpus of combat knowledge, which is called Jiu-Jitsu, which was basically the martial art of the samurai, of the warrior class of Japan. And it involved a lot of throwing and a lot of grappling, because when you're in armor especially and you're fighting against other samurai, grappling is actually very useful. And throwing somebody down is also very useful. That's why they both have that kind of approach. It's just that Aikido is very stylized and Judo is a combat sport. It's a full contact sport, and you're trying to do this against somebody who really doesn't want to let you do it. That alone is creating a level of competition and of difficulty that makes training more practical. can you fight against anybody just with judo? No, it's the same like wrestling. If you fight against a very good striker with good footwork, he might not let you get near enough to apply your judo. But if somebody gets a hold of somebody else, which, it's very hard to keep your distance in certain situations, like enclosed spaces or crowded places or whatnot, where you cannot use your footwork to full extent, then judo becomes very efficient. So the other martial art I want to talk about, the final one, is Muay Thai. Muay Thai is from Thailand, and it's basically something very similar to kickboxing. So I'm going to put it all the way up to A. And the reason why it's similar, well, you can understand why it's similar to kickboxing, but there are some differences between the two of them. Purely from experience, from having seen just way too many Muay Thai and kickboxing fights in my life, I will say that kickboxers typically have better punching, and Muay Thai guys typically have better kicking. Even though kickboxers also have great kicking, but I would give a slight edge to Muay Thai guys for their kicks. Muay Thai also has another great thing about it, which is that they heavily train elbows, which are allowed in Muay Thai competitions. And I think there are also only some hybrid kickboxing competitions where elbows may be allowed. For the most part, they're not. Muay Thai uses knees, kicks, punches, elbows, almost everything. And also, the conditioning of Muay Thai fighters is insane. That alone, the conditioning that they do, how they train from being little kids, how they're kicking trees and whatnot, it's really, really tough conditioning. That gives them an edge in a fight usually. But I wouldn't give them so much of an edge as to take Muay Thai all the way up to MMA or Sambo levels, because if a good grappler, for example, gets hold of a Muay Thai guy, he will still be in big trouble. So that's the final ranking. And now, here's the bonus ranking that I promised you at the beginning of the video. If you stuck around so far, you are getting that now. And that is how this is modified when we're talking about not 1-versus-1 combat, but multiple opponents. So if you have multiple opponents, some things do change. One thing that changes is that BJJ, for example, it collapses all the way to the very bottom. When you've got multiple opponents, BJJ becomes a big, big liability. Taking somebody down or starting to grapple against one person may be very effective against that person, but the moment you do that and there are other people attacking you, you're a big, big immobile target on the ground for them to stomp on, punch, do whatever they want. And you literally have almost no defense against that. So it's a terrible thing to do, to get into a BJJ fight when you have multiple opponents. It's literally the worst approach you can take. Just start grappling on the ground with somebody when you're being attacked by another 2 or 3 people or something. So wrestling, for a similar reason, wrestling goes to tier C, drops to tier C when it comes to multiple opponents. Because once you get hold of somebody, you cannot do anything against somebody else. But it's still a bit better than BJJ, because with BJJ you get tangled up with one person in order to make your techniques work. While with wrestling, you kind of do have the possibility to keep tossing people around, hoping that they will hurt themselves by the throws, and then just go from one person to the other. It's still a bad approach, terrible approach. Probably you're gonna end up beaten, but it's still something a little more viable than tangling up yourself with a BJJ in a BJJ fight in the ground with one person while you're being attacked by others. Now, you will see that Kung Fu and Aikido stay there. Well, they don't go any higher, they don't go any lower either. They are as inefficient against one person as they are against many. Even though in Aikido they do train against multiple attackers, but it's a joke. It's a complete joke how they do it. People attack, in a row, and they cooperate. So, of course, it's ridiculous. It's never going to work in a million years in a real situation. And you can also see that we've got some martial arts here, like Kampfringen doesn't change much. It's also a little superficial against multiple opponents, but it doesn't get any worse because it's equally superficial. Taekwondo doesn't change. I will say that karate, because Taekwondo, of course, is ineffective in its strikes, that's why it doesn't change. But karate, I would say, when it has to do with multiple opponents, both karate and ninjutsu, they do jump up one level. Ninjutsu, it jumps up because of its anything goes approach and it's, whatever comes approach. So that really helps with multiple opponents, because one of the big problems of that is freezing or like getting overloaded with, information maybe, and not knowing what to do when you have too many people to deal with. I mean, this is hard enough against one person already. With many people, you need to be much better at it. And ninjutsu has that fluidity of mind, so that's why I will take it up one level against multiple opponents. And karate, I take it up one level because it's got it's got some practicality in its strikes. The defense against one opponent from close range is not great, but it has a lot of great mobility, so they do move in and out very well. So I'll give it an edge for that reason compared to its 1 versus 1 effectiveness, because people can just move out and they can try to deal with multiple opponents this way. Just strike and move out. Hit and run, let's say. So that way maybe you will be able to chip away at different people enough to defeat them eventually. Still a big maybe, but yeah, it's a bit of an edge that it has in that way. Krav Maga now. Krav Maga will go up a level against multiple opponents simply because of its no-nonsense approach. And the fact that it doesn't, it's very practical. It doesn't allocate too much time or energy against somebody. All the energy that is allocated is very practically oriented, and it's, whatever it takes to take him out and then go to the next. So for that reason, it goes up a level when you have to deal with multiple opponents. It's got that kind of mentality, you can say. So that is useful. Judo and boxing, they stay the same in effectiveness. Judo would normally go down, being a grappling-oriented martial arts against multiple opponents, but it stays where it is because of its approach with very quick throws. So it's very possible, if you're a very good judoka, to keep throwing people around very fast, much faster than a typical wrestler, and definitely Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. You can be tossing people around in judo in a quick succession, so you might be able to actually deal with many people in this way if they're not trained in judo. If they're trained in judo and they resist, or they're wrestlers, they have a good takedown defense, then you might be in trouble. Boxing, it's also something that you can move around and keep punching people, so it stays where it is. It doesn't drop anywhere. And of course, it doesn't increase in its effectiveness in any way against many opponents. It just stays where it is. Kickboxing and Muay Thai also stay where they are, and it's not too bad. They're A-class, A-tier martial arts. They're really effective against multiple opponents. If you're a good kickboxer or Muay Thai practitioner, you have a great chance at dealing with them. But you don't have a perfect chance because, of course, there is always the risk of a takedown, which kind of becomes bigger the more people you have to deal with. But if you factor also the movement, the mobility, which is great, both in Muay Thai and especially in kickboxing, then I would say that you have a good chance of dealing with people, multiple opponents, using those martial arts. And finally, Sambo and MMA stay at the top, simply because they are completely rounded, and you can use them just as well against one or multiple opponents. What is more, they give you a deeper understanding of what people can do, because when you know all aspects of fighting, when you know striking and kicking and punching and grappling and being at the bottom, being at the top, and throws and takedowns, when you know all that stuff, you actually are not going to be surprised by anything an attacker throws at you. And you can actually also modify your strategy. For example, let's say you fight with 3 opponents and you're not going to grapple with any of them because you know what is going to happen. And if you end up knocking 2 of them out, then there is 1 left. Then you can actually switch to grappling, which you can do when you know MMA or Sambo. And so for that reason, they stay at the top. I'd like to thank you all for watching. I would be very interested in hearing your comments or your thoughts on those martial arts, especially if you've done some of them. And as always, have a nice day. I hope you find this video interesting.